You're listening to a Rock Candy podcast.
Hey, I'm Andrew.
And I'm John.
Our show, Magnified Pod, is the only podcast that discusses culture, religion, politics, and deep dives into the discographies of the bands that shaped a generation of 90s youth group kids.
We share our thoughts on the Christian bookstore alternate universe scene we grew up in, our changing religious views, and the alternative music that formed us, going through albums track by track.
We've also interviewed band members, producers, filmmakers, and artists, and had fascinating, profound, and silly conversations along the way.
Check out Magnified Pod on the Rock Candy Podcast Network and wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome to the Eleventyseven podcast.
What's up, unicorns? Matt here, coming to you from the magical Rock Candy Recording Studios in Asheville, North Carolina. So happy to have you with us here for this episode. We have got a ton of fun projects in the works right now here at Rock Candy Recordings, and one of them just so happens to be some brand spanking new Eleventyseven tunes, and I'm getting really excited about this. I'm literally finalizing artwork for a brand new single as I'm sitting here recording this podcast intro, and we will absolutely be sharing some more information about that very soon. Huge hugs and high fives to all the unicorns over at the Eleventy Live Facebook group. You beautiful bunch of people. I cannot thank you enough for all of the love and support that you show our band and that you show each other. It is a beautiful thing to watch. Speaking of things we're doing here at Rock Candy, we just had a brand spanking new show join the network this past month. It is called the Pickle and Boot Shop with Reese Roper of the band Five Iron Frenzy and with Joe Yerke of the band The Insiders. If you are looking for garbage conversation in a highly stressful environment, I can't encourage you enough to check out their new show. And yes, I got paid to say that. Be sure to check them out wherever you get your podcasts. To all of our fellow artists, band members, singers, songwriters, the world is starting to open back up, and it is something that we are super excited about. And while we do have a lot of irons in the fire here at the Rock Candy Studios, we would always love for you to be a part of that. If you are looking for production, mixing, or mastering services, we absolutely love working with indie artists, helping them craft and create tracks that are going to move the needle on their career musically. It's amazing seeing people put their own brand of magic out into the world, and we feel very honored when they choose to have us be a part of that. So if you want to find out more about that, head on over to rockcandyrecordings.com. Drop us a line, tell us about your project. This week, I get to sit down with the one and only John Reuben. If you were a youth group kid in the 2000s, then you have to know who I'm talking about. We got to do some fun shows together way back in the day, but it is only now as adults that we're able to sit down and have a halfway decent conversation with each other. And I really did have the best time. It is always so cathartic to be able to talk about the weirdness that was the Christian music scene in the 2000s. And I think that John in particular has a gift for pulling some joy and positivity and good memories out of all of those experiences. And I feel grateful that we were able to sit down and talk about it. We had such a good time. I'm going to go ahead and warn you that this episode is going to be a two-parter because we just couldn't stop hanging out. I hope that you are as here for it as I am. One more thing before we get started. We have our latest album, Basic Glitches, on limited edition colored vinyl on sale right now at the Rock Candy Recordings online store. And if you enter the code BASIC at checkout, you will get $5 off every vinyl copy of Basic Glitches that you purchase. Thank you in advance for adding that to your vinyl collection. And without further ado, I can't wait for you guys to hear all the fun that I had with John Reuben. Hi.
Hey.
How are you?
Good, man. How are you?
I'm doing great.
I think it used to be a place for a dude to store his boats, but it's been converted into kind of a hang area. Let me turn this off.
Okay. Oh, okay.
How's that?
Oh, man. Well, so that's so much better, but now I'm a little self-conscious that we might have created a ticking clock for how long you could stand to be in the boathouse.
No, it's fine. It's not too cold. It's not too cold here.
Okay, awesome. Okay, good. All of that stuff out of the way. Feeling good. ready to hang out. Tell me what you've been up to.
Super comfortable, man. Well, yesterday I coached a Little League soccer game, assistant coach.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Assistant to the general manager.
I just, it's funny is I have never played soccer. Have you played soccer? Did you play soccer?
It was one of the first things that I played when I was a kid. And it became very clear to everyone it's probably not my thing.
Yeah, well, at least you had some experience. I had no experience, but I felt really bad because the coach was like, it wouldn't matter feeling bad. I felt responsible as a dad because the coach was like, hey, does anybody want to help? I want to help. I could use all the help I can get. He was coaching by himself. I said, hey, man, I've never played. I don't know really much about the game, but I definitely am down to help if you're cool with that.
He's like, as long as you can carry juice boxes, we're good. I can't unload this shit out of my car one more time.
So, it's funny. I've been showing up and helping coach soccer, and it's been really fun. But I'm definitely I was on a learning curve for sure. So I'm texting my brother-in-law who was a really good soccer player.
Nice.
I'm texting him. I'm like, explain offsides to me again real quick. Explain offsides, and I'm having the kids teach me, making sure that I'm kicking the ball right. They're like, yeah, you want to kick it with this side. I've been pretty honest about my lack of experience, but nonetheless, it's really fun. And I'm understanding the game better now, and it's actually really, really fun.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's just like anything. The more that you kind of understand the culture that goes along with it and the rules. I don't want to give the impression that I know anything about soccer just because I played it. Doesn't mean I understood what was going on.
How old were you how long did you play?
Oh, it was probably like 10 or 11 when I played, and the movie The Big Green had just come out. I don't know if you remember that or not. And I was like, this looks hella sweet. And so I was like, I got my parents on board. I'm like, I really want to sign up. So we went to the Y, and it was pretty disastrous. But
The Big Green. Who is in that?
All of the kids that were in those sports movies. I feel like there might have been a little bit of crossover between like The Sandlot, Big Green,
Mighty Ducks.
Yeah.
Was Emilio Estevez was he the coach?
I doubt it.
I remember. I think Bad News Bears. It was the Bad News Bears, the baseball team one, right?
Yes.
That was a little earlier, right?
That was like 70s, I think.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not that old. I don't know why I'm associating 90s movies with 70s movies.
Well, by the time you were a kid, it was probably really cheap to license that on cable. So you probably saw it growing up.
Well, no, because there was no cable in our house. That's what the fancy kids had. Were you one of the kids with cable?
No, I was not. We had like 3 channels, 4 on a good day. And my grandmother, who lived in an apartment complex, like everybody in the apartments got cable. So she would take VHS tapes and like record cartoons for us to watch.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Cable was definitely, when I visited my grandmother, one of my grandmas, she had cable. And that was a real treat. You had like Nickelodeon and, stuff like that. That was pretty incredible to be so many options out there. Yeah, I was definitely 3 or 4 channels, and I feel like I ended up watching soap operas when I got home from school at some point.
Yes, absolutely.
I feel like I was.
The weird thing is, like, I feel like older generations get a bad rap because all the younger people are like, guys, can you just get with it? Like, learn the technology, do the thing. But when we were coming up, like, they were early cable adopters. Like, that was brand new technology, and they were enjoying it before everybody else. And maybe they had a sense of like, no, this is meant to be enjoyed, not to like rule your life. And so they just like maintain a certain amount of distance from it. It's all a conspiracy, and they actually know what they're doing, and we have no idea. Yeah, maybe that's not true.
Well, now I'm giving it some serious consideration, and I'm trying to actually recall what you said, that they are actually early adapters. Maybe I got a little too scatterbrained. I started focusing on one thing you said, and I think I missed about 5 seconds of the other thing you said, and it threw me all off. You're suggesting that our parents, is that what you're saying?
Our grandparents.
Our grandparents. Okay, there you go.
Yeah.
Our grandparents. Okay, yes, okay. Very good. All right. We don't need to spend any more time talking about this.
Okay, good. You're released from that conversation.
I left you with an awkward, like, and then didn't give you any sort of banter back and forth about it. Then I felt back because I realized if I started talking, I got to be honest, I didn't pay attention to about 10 seconds of what you said. Then I started feeling guilty. But now
you are so in your head, John. So in your head. I can absolutely relate to that. There are many moments. I call them check please moments with people, whether it's me like being in my own head, trying to have conversations and then getting way too into what somebody said that I can't move on in the conversation. And so I kind of get stuck on a loop and the table's moved on, but I'm still back here at chapter 1 and I'm like, wait a minute, Frodo did what?
Well, you're kind of like, you're a producer in that sense because you find the hook, you find the thing that's really interesting, the thing that you're like, I want to stay there. And your artists are like, no, I want to explore and go over here. You're like, no, we need to really hone in on this. I feel like we've captured that moment. We need to really hone in on that and turn that into something. So, or maybe that's just my perspective. I'm looking for the hook, and then my brain gets stuck on that. Yeah, and then I want to start looping it.
Yes, it's the fun kind of neuroses when you have something to show for it at the end. So you and I were talking about this a couple weeks ago, and I feel like what I should have done was just record the conversation that you and I had a couple weeks ago, because I definitely don't want anything that we're talking about now to feel forced, but I feel like you had some really interesting things to say. You and I never really got to hang out a ton, like back in the Christian music rock and roll festival days of existence. And I was sort of lamenting that to you last time we were on the phone, because I feel like we have a lot of similarities in that we probably had a lot of unturned stones that we could have had a fun time with. But we were talking about your approach to creativity, and I feel like a lot of people, sort of the oddness of that whole Christian rock rap world, something that we talk about ad nauseum on the podcast, which I feel like is why people like to tune into it, because everybody's still kind of unpacking and demystifying this whole experience that we had together. I would love to hear this story of kind of how you sort of, like, what did your origin story look like? If you're a Marvel Avengers person, if you're a Marvel Avengers hero, what does your origin story look like? What were those first sort of moments in your career, the opportunities that were given to you that sort of took you to the next level?
All right. Well,
you mean business, clasping the hands and everything.
I think I talked to you a little bit about this. It wasn't like I don't think I understood the ins and outs of the music industry as well as maybe some other artists did. But perhaps that gave me a leg up in other ways, because I was always really, I think, enthusiastic and excited and adamant about building my own thing. Mm-hmm. You know, like I sort of always looked at it like, you know, we could. I wasn't really a huge fan of Christian music growing up, with
good reason.
Well, you know, man, it's interesting because I think people were bigger fans of Christian music than I realized when they signed the record deals. I always kind of understood Christian music as it almost just felt like event music. And I don't know how to put it. Like, it didn't feel like there was a lot of like, hey man, you're an artist, be an artist. It felt like, hey, serve this purpose type of music.
Right.
And, so I wasn't a huge fan of it, but I was a really big fan of kind of some of the underground Christian hip hop that was out there, because it was really, really good. And I realized how influential that music was on me, and I still really like it. So it wasn't like I listened to some of the old stuff and then I roll my eyes like, boy, what was I thinking? I'm like, no, I listened to it in comparison, right in there, mixed in as a perspective with all the other hip hop I was listening to. And so a big goal for me, I think, was I wanted to build something, I think on an independent level, but I wanted to build we were always using words like, we're going to build a movement. And, always we were always trying to use really robust language to explain the culture we were trying to create, which I think was really good and meaningful. I don't mean to mock my former self, my 16, 17-year-old John. But so that was kind of where my head was at. And I think in the late 90s, my mother simultaneously was really into Christian death metal. And
we've never talked about this.
We've never
what
talked
the
about
hell?
this. Okay. So my mother was really into Christian death metal, and she ended up running a Christian death metal label, or at least the U.S. arm of a death metal label that I think was based out of Australia.
Wow.
So she ended up working with a lot of different, really very, very intense metal music. Like a lot of the metal bands that I ended up doing shows with on the road were like, your mom listens to stuff, it's too heavy for us. I mean, it was very... really, really intense death metal. And so she was always into like what was going on in Sweden and Norway.
This is so weird. Did your mom grow up in that sort of culture? Because that's so niche, John. I don't know if anybody would look at you and your creative output and ever assume that there was a lineage that you came from somebody who was so into a death metal scene, especially your mom.
No, man. Well, here's so my mom would probably be a better, if you'd like to interview her, I can set that up. She would probably be a better Marvel character, the origins. Right. I grew up, a lot of the churches I went to were very, growing up, were very kind of detached from the rest of what was going on in the world. So there was no, my mom had been was at Woodstock, was kind of a part of that whole, 60s movement. And then, she became a believer, and, she cut everything out. No art, nothing. I say no art, but no rock, I should say that. So growing up, there was no rock and roll. We were definitely a little bit removed from what was happening in pop culture. Yeah. And then one day my mom said she heard something on Christian radio, and the song was really beautiful. And, and I remember this. So somehow she won tickets to the show, and this was maybe 89, maybe 1990. I'd have been 10. And she won tickets to a Petra show.
Oh my God. Poor thing.
So she wasn't supposed to listen to Petra because it was rock music, but her attitude was something this beautiful can't be evil. And so,
wow.
She took us to this show at the state fair, and me and my brother, I don't know how it happened, but me and my brother ended up getting prime seats. She gave us the prime seats, and so she sat in the back. She wanted us to be up front, so we were front row at this concert. And beforehand, because
she needed deniability,
I was 10, my brother's 13. We ended up backstage at this concert, at this Christian heavy metal concert, glam metal concert. I'm I just remember eating chunks of cheese off of the green, not the green room. Whatever. Well, I did 1,500 shows. I should know what the table's called.
Craft services.
Craft services. How do you forget that? As much cheese and crackers as I've eaten off of craft services. But and then we watched the show, and I remember thinking oh man, Mom is gonna be pissed. This was some dangerous music. Yeah. And then so we met her out front after the show, and I think she was standing with somebody who was younger, someone else who was in their 20s, who had ripped jeans and full blown Christian rock attire. And I was well, Mom, what'd you think? Thinking she was going to be really nervous. And she was that was awesome.
She loved it.
She loved it. And then it just progressively got heavier
Yeah.
and heavier and heavier until like she was showing us, I laughed because she would show us videos. Like, she's like, check this guy out. This is like when the internet was relatively new. And it was some guy who filmed himself. Actually, this might have been later on in the 2000s, but it just kind of to show her progression. It was a guy who had taken a bunch of factory noises, looped them, crushed them, distorted them, and was playing a metal show over a laptop with all this, like, really, it was kind of pretty interesting and cool, but I was like, how is my mother way into this, like, avant-garde? It was like a total, like, right, like all this crazy light and distortion, and she got way into it, man. So she ended up touring with a few metal bands and ended up helping run a label. And so anyways, that was a long story to tell you. I guess I couldn't just leave you hanging with my mom used to run a death metal label.
I think that's wonderful. That's absolutely wonderful.
She had a distribution deal, and I ended up putting out my first project. We were kind of saying, okay, I'll start like this little indie label and be kind of a subsidiary and kind of piggyback off the distribution you have. Yeah. And so, I signed. I say signed. I don't even know what that means. We were going to. It was sort of like branded. We branded this thing called the Diverse Family, and I brought in a rock band, and I was kind of like, all right, we'll do this sort of thing. And one thing led to another. I had a quick went to LA for a little bit, came back around 2000, and at that point, off of the EP I put out, which I don't think even got distributed officially, I don't believe, because it was just an EP. Goatee Records was interested in signing me, and so
how does your music get in the hands of somebody at Goatee?
One of the guys I recorded with was a drummer. Rick May was a drummer for DC Talk, super cool guy.
Gotcha.
And he recorded one of my tunes, and he ended up playing it for Toby. Toby really liked it. Somehow I got in contact with a guy who was a manager in Nashville, who was just going to help me kind of navigate my music a little bit.
Of course he was.
He was a super, super cool dude. Cool dude. Again, I had a lot better experiences, I think, than a lot of other people.
Sure.
With the people they worked with. But he was a super cool dude. It ended up in the hands of Toby as well. So Toby had simultaneously gotten it from his drummer, and at the same time, somebody else, through this guy. I think this guy had dropped it off at Goatee, and the Goatee guys were like, hey, someone else, dropped this off, and we were listening to this as well. And so both people had been listening to my EP, and I had interest from some other labels, but I liked Goatee. I appreciated what they were doing. I thought Grits was really good. Yeah. And I liked some of the other artists they had. I thought, they had a cool style, good vibe going on. And I was like, all right, maybe instead of being so cynical about Christian music, I can make the music I would want to listen to and, not sell these fans short and try to put this music out. And so I signed that deal, and then, was a interesting ride for about really interesting ride for about 10 years.
So get a little bit microscopic with that. Do you remember what was in the deal, how many options there were on it, what your advances were?
I don't remember. I don't think the advance was huge. I don't recall it being huge relative to what I think people would think. I say that, but for me at the time, I was like, this is so much money. Yeah. So for me, I think I had a deal with Goatee, and then through them, Toby and Joey had a publishing company. I had a deal with that publishing company. Right. And then it was, I believe, a 1+5, because I actually finished my full deal with Goatee. Okay. So I put out 6 records through Goatee, and I finished my deal. So it would have been a 1+5.
Gotcha. So how did they calculate what your advances would be the more music that you released?
I didn't ask any of these questions. I have no idea. Look, man, somebody wanted to offer me a little bit of money, and they wanted to help me make records, I was like, all right, this seems a lot easier than doing it myself. So I went into it very, very naive. I didn't have steady management. I don't think I ever had a long-term relationship with a manager. So I spent the majority of my career, the vast majority of my career, doing it all myself and then kind of learning as I go. But I think I built a lot of my understanding in those early days around, especially when it came to like money, was that I'm going to make money when I play shows. And then I was like, and oh my gosh, these people want to buy my shirts and I can make money selling these shirts.
Yeah.
So that became my mentality, like, okay, well, this is how I make money. It was never, in my mind, it was never like, I'm going to make a bunch of money off of putting records out. Because I think I knew enough to know it's hard for a record label to make money off artists. I think people don't realize that. And a lot of times I think they want to just look at the label and say, oh, the big bad label. But I'm like, I don't think they understand to keep the lights on at a record label and to take a risk on an artist and hope that enough people care about your music. And again, at that time, it was like, this wasn't, you weren't just loading stuff up to iTunes. I mean, you had to print physical products.
Yeah.
You had to send it out. There was a lot of risk involved with the label, and the fact that they were willing to like take that chance on me, I was always super appreciative. But later on, I started realizing like, oh, there is money here. And I think, that's when I think I started realizing, oh, what's this thing called publishing? This is nice.
Right.
That sort of thing.
Yeah.
But that was all like a learning process over the first putting out an album or two. And because I was managing myself, I think I was fairly naive. I mean, again, I understood the idea of setting up a proper little business for myself.
Yeah.
But my business was all about touring, and I didn't think of it. I always like, you guys put out the records. If you're promoting them, that's getting me on the road. And if I'm on the road, I can make money that way. That was kind of where I thought I saw it. And then one day you start realizing like, oh, I'm getting these checks for publishing. That's nice too,
Yeah. So what you're saying right now is something that I feel like is very similar to a bunch of different artists that I talked to that kind of came from that whole class of the 2000s realm of Christian rock, where I feel like all of us were, like, none of us were super withholding with each other about information, at least the ones of us that didn't feel like we were in competition with each other. But it was like this really weird subculture of there's only so many churches, there's only so many festivals, and there's only so many Christian kids. And there were some bands who were just fighting like hell, if you'll pardon the pun, to try to get, like, to try to make it to the top of that mountain. Like, that was their thing. And there was their own sort of really odd, weird sense of entitlement that came with that. And it's like, in the big scheme of things, no matter how big you are in Christian music, it has no bearing on what you are to the rest of the world. Like, it really is just your own tiny little bubble of a world to be in. And I think that really early on, we kind of started to see that and understand that, like, it doesn't matter if we become the biggest thing in Christian music, it still is not. It's like, why? I think, like, why would you want something like that? I think for me personally, I was starting to understand some things about my ego and about the more attention that was paid to me and the less accountability that I had, the more miserable I feel like I was. Because I didn't want to be. It's like I loved having attention. I loved feeling important. But at the end of the day, all of that kind of runs its course. And you're like, okay, well, it's just, I can get this feeling somewhere else. And this is not making me a better person. It actually makes me feel like more of a liability, because the more attention that gets paid to me, the easier it is to mismanage all of it. I don't know if you experienced any of that.
Well, because I didn't think Christian music was cool growing up, and because I don't think I loved pop music in general, I was kind of removed from all of it. Yeah. Like, the lane I was in was like, I liked independent. I wouldn't say independent, meaning like I liked some of the hip hop that was on the radio, but it was just a different, I wasn't obsessed with like celebrity culture or anything of that on that end. And I think I went into Christian music, and this sounds mean, and I'm not trying to be mean, but I knew it was corny.
Yeah.
So when I signed that deal, I knew that it was corny.
Yeah.
But it didn't mean it had to be bad. It didn't mean that it couldn't be artistic. It didn't mean that it couldn't be meaningful.
Yes.
But I knew that the title of Christian rapper is pretty corny. Like I got that. I understood that.
Yeah.
And at the same time, it was the opportunity that was in front of me due to the nature of the kind of music I was writing. If somebody was going to support that, and I was like, I felt pretty good about my decision. It felt like a genuine good decision. I didn't feel like I was stepping into it just to use the industry.
You felt like you still had some agency in your life, and that this was just something that you could use to move on to whatever was next.
Well, or like, I was like, let's just do it and see where it goes.
Sure.
I mean, at the time, I didn't know there wasn't, it was the best opportunity in front of me.
Yeah.
And, and again, it wasn't like I was hungry to get a mainstream deal. Cause again, I didn't even think the mainstream was that cool. You know what I mean? Like,
what is cool to you, John? Vegetarian options.
No, I was kind of, I was full of myself in other ways. Like, I thought I was way smarter than I was.
Okay.
Yeah,
of course.
I thought someday, I think I envisioned myself being this like brilliant poet. And then I look back on a lot of the stuff I was writing. I was like, man, you were just, not only is it like not good poetry, but your attempts at sounding smart were so, like, it's clear you're not a smart guy. And you're just identifying with this sort of like philosophical, I'm hanging out.
Right. You have an idea of somebody that you think you'd enjoy being.
Oh, I thought, and I was like, I don't think I had ever like read any of his books, but in the back of my mind, I think I had some sort of like Jack Kerouac ideal, like, and my parents were, hippies, and I just kind of grew up, I grew up on pretty close to growing up on some communes. And so like, I had this I had a weird thing, even though it was very religious, there was something I appreciated, and it kind of informed kind of my outlook on life. So I guess what I say when I signed that deal with the Christian record label, I thought they were putting out good stuff. I really liked the people at the label. I liked some of the artists. I thought the music was good. And then I had a chance to travel. And you're like, oh my gosh.
Yes.
Like, I'm like, I'm 20 years old. I'm driving, and we traveled a lot easier than you guys traveled. Like, I don't think we had we didn't have a van, a trailer for a long time. I mean, it was like turntables, or I would travel at the time with like a DAT machine, then eventually a CD player. And
nice.
I think I got booked in Europe with and now looking back on it, it was very, very stupid of me. But I went by myself with another rapper, and all I had was one CD with my backtracks.
Oh my God, John. No.
This is before anybody could have emailed you. So I like emailed you the tracks. So I went to Europe, and I rocked so many shows with just this one disc. If the disc got scratched, if the sound man lost it, it could have created all sorts of problems. And but I think it was just a very, there was part of like, there was a lot of kind of like allowed me the space to kind of keep my shows very minimal, interactive and fun. And so I think my stuff actually lended itself well to some of the, I was trying to think of how to even say this, lack of production that would be at many of the shows. So I didn't have that sort of like, let's roll out the big production. And I was like, we planned our shows around, okay, like the sound system isn't going to be good till about track 3. They're not going to dial it in. They're going to be kids that don't know your music at all.
Right.
You're going to be playing on some cheap speakers outside. And it was, so I was like, I started creating a show, I think, with the culture in mind. And part of that was a fun challenge. And part of that was like, I think I started looking at a lot of these shows like, what are these fascinating, weird places we're playing in the hills of West Virginia that nobody else would play? Who else is playing with inflatable? I mean, the amount of stories we had, And so I think it was a little easier for me to show up and because we could kind of play these crazy shows, then get back into the van and either talk about how great it was or how horrible it was and laugh.
Right.
And just talk about it like it was like almost like, it was just, you kind of almost turn it into something romantic instead of tragic.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, and it kind of, and so like, I think I didn't have that sort of, I don't know if I ever was, I'm sure I was competitive. I absolutely know I was competitive. But I think for me, I knew that there was a ceiling on Christian music.
Sure.
Which is part of the reason I treated it like a small business.
Yeah.
And because of that, we were able to do well for ourselves, I think, in the sense that we were able to stay on the road. Mm-hmm. We weren't paying a manager.
Right.
And it wasn't, sometimes I was. I had a manager, maybe. There was a little period where I had management, but I think it just changed probably my outlook on it because I just treated it like a small business.
Right.
And I knew that there were definitely limitations, and I knew there was nothing super sexy about Christian rock.
Well, there can't be. There can't be anything sexy about it, John.
What?
God forbid there be a rogue boner amidst a group of teens and nobody know what to do with it. So one of the things that I have always, just stepping back a couple of steps to where you were, I've actually always thought every time that we ever played a show with you that I've always been impressed at your crowd work, at your ability to sort of humanize and interact with a group of people and make people feel like they're a part of something and like you're only an outsider if you choose not to be a part of this thing. But it's a very kind and accepting sort of space that I saw you create whenever we would play shows. And I always admired that about you. To me, I would liken it to it's the difference between like you're a rock band, and so your whole thing is just sort of to project all of this like loud, bombastic energy because like you're tapping into this like angsty part of teenagers that just need to expel energy into the world, and that's how they're going to connect. And I feel like you had this very sort of focused, almost like stand-up comedy sort of reverence to what you were doing in that you understood the room and how to work the room in a way that rock bands weren't working it the same way that you were working it. At least those are my memories. So I just wanted to compliment you on that because we talked about that in the van a lot. Just like, what's working, what's not, what happened? Did we hit a flow that night? Was it just a weird crowd or are we the problem? Those conversations ad nauseum. So.
Well, no, I appreciate that, man. Again, I think it's because I was aware of the audiences we were playing.
Yeah.
That kind of goes back to like, because I knew, I think a lot of the Christian music was event music.
Yeah.
It's like, you can book this really big Christian rock band that'll come in, or you can book the comedian. No. Or the magician. No, but I think I've understood the context of why people were booking me. And I balanced that out with, I think, something that I could be proud of artistically, but then also not just wanting to show up and not be able to provide a service for these crazy youth camps and youth groups in West Virginia. Yeah. And we used to, I think, I don't know. You were probably experienced this, but if you were to ever like make a tour shirt, and we never did, or maybe we did, I don't know. But the cities that would have been on the back of that tour shirt.
I see where you're going with this. Might not even be cities anymore.
I'm telling you all you need to know about Christian music. It's just like the places you would end up playing. And it's like, you kind of know I'm not going into this. And it's not, I think the bigger you got, and there were certainly bands that could go in, but it's like, okay, we're playing this cool club in Cleveland. We're playing this cool club in New York and Philly and all that. It's like, we're playing this, I think it's a YMCA, maybe. in this township somewhere in Kansas.
Right.
2 hours from Wichita. So I got to fly into Wichita and then rent a car so I can get to this. Or you're playing this youth camp, or you're playing.
Yes.
And so I think it just sort of like you do enough of that and you realize, okay, you tailor your show for that a little bit. And then you find what's cool and artistic and creative, but I definitely think I had the audience in mind. And I think that was probably the challenge of it all.
Yeah.
Whereas very rarely, I think it would be harder for a rock band. How many times did you just walk in and were the lights great and were the sound system amazing? Or how many times you walk in and it was like, oh man, how are we going to make this work?
Right. Yeah. We always had like a manager or booking agent on speed dial. We would have like conversations ad nauseum with a booking agent. I don't know if you experienced any of this dissonance or not, but a big thing for us was that we were constantly being put in these situations where we're like, look, for better or worse, we're just a pop punk band with synthesizers. We're just here to do our music and have a good time. But all of this like other stuff in the middle of like wanting us to do altar calls or talk to your kids. Like we would go into camp sometimes and they would be like, hey, we really want you guys to host like just like a really quick seminar on, like what it is to be a Christian artist or ways in which, you can be closer to Christ. And we were always pushing back on that and sort of trying to get everybody to see how absurd it was that you're asking teenage kids to come in and do that, or even early 20-something people. I was like, I know enough about the world to know I know nothing of it. And I'm a liability. Like if I were a lawyer, I would be coming to you say like, you can't expose kids to, you know what I mean?
I do. Yeah, absolutely. Like the expectation I think that was put on those artists or a lot of us. And I think for me, like I was never writing music to offer anybody a definitive position on anything. I was writing to work out what I believed. And I think there was this sort of like almost really sense of like, I don't know how, first of all, I'm working through what I believe. And yet you want me to give a strong position on what you believe.
Right.
And even inside of this world, there's multiple varying belief systems underneath this world. And now you're booking me thinking I understand the world you inhabit, the ideas that you think are absolute truth.
Yes. They want you to galvanize the bias.
And I'm like, man, haven't you heard like any of my, like you probably have only heard some of the more popular tunes, because a lot of these other tunes I'm talking about, like, I don't know what I believe with this. I'm telling you, I don't know what I believe with this. Now you're telling me you want me to be super sure and super confident and give like a definitive position on this sort of stuff. And I was like, look, I don't want to, you got your thing. I don't want to, I'm happy to be a part of your event until I sometimes would see the event and I'm like, boy, I wish we wouldn't have booked this event. I've had some awkward conversations with people who came just for our show at events and been like, man, I did not see that coming. I'm sorry. I'm sorry you brought your girlfriend to this event. Yeah. This was a weirdo. We call that guy a weirdo. That guy who just, went on an angry rant about like, I've got it. You've got those stories. I've got those stories.
Yeah, this is how you know that you're going to have a bad show. If anybody you care about is going to show up. If it's a family member or somebody that you're dating or like a friend from back in high school, that you know what I mean? And they're like, hey, I really want to come hang out. They're always going to show up at the show where there's like snake handling and shit. Or there's like, exactly what you're talking about, like the disgruntled youth pastor that's like, keep it in your pants for crying out loud.
I admit, one of the first shows we did, I around my first album, I believe, might have been my second album, but I'm pretty sure it was my first album. I did this show and we got there and the guy was like, okay, you're going to open the night up. Yeah. You're going to do 2 songs. He goes, and then it was one of these, I can't remember exactly, but there was a sequence of events and we were going to like be integrated into the evening.
Oh,
like,
God.
You'll do a couple songs and then we'll bring up the mimes. And then you're going to do a couple more songs. Yes. And then we're going to bring out the flags or do something like, there was this all this sort of stuff. I was like, and at that point, you just kind of detach from the situation. You're like, I'm in the country somewhere and far away from home. I need to get paid.
Right.
I need to eat something, and let's just chalk it up to experience. Who else is getting to have this experience? What other rapper friends of mine are getting to have this experience? So
yeah,
but I just remember like playing, and then we would like get on stage, and we're doing all this sort of like, yay, throw your hands in the air, everyone have a good time.
Yeah,
and then it was like, I remember the Mind Team came out, and it was something about like the rapture. It was like. Everybody got taken away. One guy was alone. He was screaming, but God, where are you? Something like that, you know. And then we come back on. We're like, throw your hands up. Throw your hands up.
Yeah,
And we had events like that where, you know, I wouldn't say that was like the majority of our events at all, but you would just get these things and you're like, man, this is so strange. And I had enough experience with strange religion that it really wasn't like it didn't freak me out as more as like you just kind of go with the flow.
Yeah.
But as I've gotten further and further away from it, I realized how crazy this can sound to other people who, if you didn't grow up around this sort of thing, you know,
right.
And how actually, you know, at times it's just, at times all it is peculiar, and at times it's toxic.
Yeah.
Depending on the you know, you can't paint it all with this broad brush and say it was all this horrible, evil, toxic stuff.
Right.
Some of it was just weird and bizarre and fun. And then some of it was really good and meaningful.
Right.
And then some of it was absolutely disturbing when you look back on it.
Yeah.
You know? And
yeah.
that's just kind of the nature of the very bizarre industry we were in.
Yeah, it was weird because you start to realize that like that industry and that those people, what you're really a part of is not necessarily a group of people with an elevated consciousness who really are trying to connect with the rest of the world. They're people who are building this own subsect within themselves. They're building their own subculture and sort of pushing the rest of the world away from themselves while at the same time claiming that it's really important to evangelize them. But it's still these weird walls. You're right. It's on this crazy spectrum where it's like some of it is like totally cool and some of it is just like, how did you end up this way? How did this many people end up buying into this, you know, in this rural part of America? I feel like there was a moment where eventually we just got so tired of it that whenever we would come into situations like that and people were like, hey, we want you to do 6 different sets, you know, we'll intersperse you. We would just sit them down and have a conversation where it's like, I know what you're doing. I see what you're trying to do with the show, but we can't do that. Because we're not going to get on here after you like absolutely break everybody's hearts and like shame them for all of their feelings and desires, you know, in the world and like build them and have this like come to Jesus thing. And then us have to follow that and like completely change the mood. I was like, it's actually going against what you're trying to do. Like if what you're trying to do is shame kids, then just focus on that. just be great. Just be good at one thing.
Just be great at. You know what? You just go on and be the best at shaming that you possibly can.
Specialize. That's the way forward.
When did you guys get signed?
I think it was like 2004 or 5. Yeah, we were like just out of high school.
Yeah. I feel like I remember you guys as in the timeline of my career in Christian music. I remember you being a part of. You came into the picture somewhere in the middle. Yeah. Because I got signed in 2000 and I stopped touring around 2010.
Oh shit. John, I remember this now because I was super a part of that. Like I really did, for a younger version of me, really did enjoy a lot of the Christian music world. Like I really was into it. Like I was a really good youth group kid. I was always the guy that was like trying to go around making sure nobody was smoking or doing drugs and, you know, all of that stuff. I do remember calling into a radio show and I think winning your debut album.
Hey, congratulations,
which would have been in 2000, and that would have been my first year of high school. So that actually makes perfect sense.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, because I feel like I got that record from you, and then maybe a year or two later, 18 months later, I ended up seeing you at a show with, I think, like 5-Iron
Yeah.
and Reliant K.
Yep.
Maybe we're on that bill.
Maybe called the Electric Boogaloo Tour or something like that.
Yeah. That was when that record had just come out.
Ace Troubleshooter.
Yes.
Yeah.
Ace Troubleshooter. Oh my God.
Well, and I think too, like that's some of the positive of when I think of Christian music.
Yeah.
Like going on tour with 5-Iron. 5-Iron was awesome. I still like 5-Iron.
Mm-hmm.
I think that Reliant K, I think Matt Thiessen's a fantastic songwriter, and I thought Reliant K was a great band, and Ace was just a super fun to hang out with. And going on that tour really was, those types of bands were really fun to be, able to be able to be
I feel
a
like
part
you're
of.
making a compliment sandwich right now. So let's.
No, I'm not. Like, look, I think a lot of, when we look back on Christian music, like I've got plenty of the I've got some pretty bad, I got some horror stories from the road, but like there are definitely a lot of, things that I appreciate and still appreciate. Yeah. And I think you kind of got to look at it and take it into context. Like, it's that sort of like, oh, it's pretty good for Christian music. No, that was actually good music.
Right.
That was good music.
Yeah.
Like, it's okay. It might have been, it might be attached to a really bizarre world we were a part of, but it was still really good music.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and
according to John Reuben.
According to John Reuben. If all of the Christian music fans out there or ex-Christian music fans out there need to be reminded of what was good and what was actually not very good, you just ask me. And I will tell you 5-Iron Frenzy was good.
Yeah. Yes. Well, that actually leads me to my next question for you, which, and we might have talked about this a couple weeks ago, but I wonder if you have a standout moment from your 10 years where maybe it was a moment where you were experiencing the most joy in your career. Maybe it was a show that you played. Maybe it was a conversation with a fan. But was there a moment in that 10 years where you look back on it now, or even in the moment might have felt like it won't get better than this because this was so good?
Well,
according to the optimism of youth and ignorance, or maybe not.
No. This is, I don't know what this says about my career. Moments that stand out where I'm like, I've arrived.
Yeah.
Or this is bliss. A lot of times weren't me even being on stage. It was me driving a van through the night when I was like maybe 21, 22.
Yeah.
On the Mexican border.
Great intro.
Stopping off at some, really remote restaurant, kind of in the desert.
This sounds like a Tarantino film, John.
Pulling out a pack of cigars that I bought at the only gas station.
Yes.
Smoking the cigar at 6 or 7 in the morning, or it would have been later at this point, like 10 in the morning, and then eating a breakfast burrito at this really great restaurant and thinking like, I am so glad I get to experience this right now.
Yeah.
Or it was being in Montana at a fantastic pizza shop called Moose's in Kalispell, Montana, and cracking, I believe, peanuts, throwing them on the ground, drinking a pitcher of beer with a new band I just met, eating some amazing pizza, being taught that sriracha on pizza tastes good.
Yes.
And then somehow people ended up dancing on the tables and having a wonderful evening, and then waking up the next morning in a fairly clean hotel room and looking at I remember the stream that was behind there and thinking like, wow, I'm in Montana. This is amazing.
Yeah.
Or it was my time in Savannah, Georgia, when I had 2 days off walking around downtown Savannah and thinking like, man, I am so glad I get to be in Savannah right now.
Yes.
Or sipping an espresso somewhere that I never would have gotten to sip an espresso at, and like somewhere in Holland. And, so I guess I have all these experiences and memories attached to different people I met from the road. There's a guy I'm still really good friends with that used to book me in South Dakota, and I still have this great relationship with him. And, and I have really fun memories of playing shows. And, I think there were definitely some meaningful, like, I think when anybody took the time to really connect with what you brought up earlier, like, hey, we were able to kind of be able to come into these events and bring these kids who never get shows in their communities.
Right.
And they felt valued. I didn't just phone it in.
Yeah.
I actually care. I cared about it because I felt like that was in a good way. It's my duty to care.
Yeah.
Those sort of things were meaningful to me. These, and then you end up at, some random restaurant after the show and people got a lot out of the show, or they like your music. They want to talk to you about your music.
Yeah.
Like I have nothing cynical to say about that. That's all like really like still means a lot to me. And I really appreciate all of that.
Yeah.
It's very, very different than the weird fundamentalists that kind of bring you in and want to sandwich you in.
Yeah.
Between, you're only there to entertain the kids until...
Right. Between the mimes and the Hell House excerpt.
How about you?
I feel like for most of the time that I was a part of the band, or that we were doing our thing within that subculture, the moments I was the happiest was whenever we were hanging out with other bands who were kind of exactly where we were, laughing, joking. This probably comes as no surprise to anybody, but probably drinking back at the hotel room, like just belly laughing, like laughing until we threw up all the pizza that we had at each other. It was just like a really cool moment in life where most of it was spent in hotel rooms or you know what I mean? Or in other people's houses or in the van. And you would just it's very easy to be on the road for a week and feel like your entire life is just passing through a van window. And so you kind of start to reach out to each other in new ways. One of the biggest ways was we would just try to be as absolutely vulgar with each other as we could be in the van. Just to get shock laughs or responses from each other.
It's like before we got to clean it up.
Yes. Right before we're in the middle of all these Christians, let's go ahead and get out everything we want to say that would be offensive or that we would just be trying to get a rise out of people with. But I think for me, it's actually like the times that we were not any of the stuff we were able to do in the mainstream, being able to go out of like the Christian rock world and do fun stuff in Japan with like bands that we really loved and cared about. Like, and there wasn't that pressure of like, you're not seen as a religious entity. Yeah. You're not doing anything other than just being a part of this like culture of fun, of youth, of like, we're just making music and talking about the world and our ideas together and, moshing and not drinking enough water, like just absolutely destroying our bodies, and we'll wake up from it, in 5 or 6 years. But for now, it's fun. Yeah. I loved that. I really did.
People say, do you miss touring? I think I told you this before. It's like people the last time we talked, but like when they ask, do you miss touring? I go, I miss being 21 and touring. Mm-hmm. I miss being 21 and touring because I don't think I could. I couldn't recreate that now.
Yeah.
And it would be a whole different. There's something also in your ignorance when you're younger of what you don't know about the world that gives you the confidence.
Or about your own record deal.
Don't know about the world. The business you're in, right, or whatever, that gives you the confidence to tell everybody that you know a lot about the world, I guess. It's like a really funny. But I also, the other thing I was thinking, I was like, as we're talking, I appreciate what I learned about myself from the road. Mm. Like even silly things. Like I found myself like a lot of the patterns of like even certain things of efficiency. Like, okay, we're in New York City for a day off.
Yeah.
We want to experience all the neighborhoods because we don't get to be in New York that often. But we also want to experience a lot of different food. How do we do this?
Yeah.
And how do we map this out? And then I would get real organized. Okay, I'm going to go take the train to this place in Brooklyn because I heard they have the best coffee.
Right.
And then so our whole day would be mapped out. And then we're going to go here because we got to eat it, Italian food. Or we got to eat some Chinese food, or we got to, and you kind of map it out, but we want to see this. Okay, what do we want to, and it's funny. I still, that sort of like taking advantage of the moment you have and really kind of being intentional.
Yeah.
I remember thinking, like, I probably learned that from, like, my days off on the road.
Yeah.
And then also realizing, like, why am I so happy when I'm not in a big city on a day off, but there's enough? It's like, because now I'm not thinking, I'm not analyzing what am I going to experience. I'm just living.
Yes.
I'm going to go see a movie. We know we're eating at the Olive Garden because it's the only reasonable thing here. And we have all day. Oh, look, there's a Starbucks at the time when Starbucks was still relatively like the fancy coffee.
Yes.
You're not trying to track down like the new third wave, whatever.
Yeah.
You're just like, I'll go to Starbucks because it's right there and it's going to be great. And this is the day. We're going to see a movie, you know, like, and I remember thinking, like, there's something about, as much as I equally love going to New York and being overwhelmed with everything, and being having to be super intentional, then there's something awesome about being stuck at this little tiny town that has just enough that you don't have to think about what you're going to do because you can only do one or two things.
Right. Yes.
And like, but those sort of things I think actually really help me kind of gather. It sounds silly. It sounds ridiculous, but those sort of lessons from the road.
No, it sounds very human.
What it taught me about myself was very like meaningful today. Like and how I kind of approach certain things in life.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Decisions forever.
Man, I love that. I don't want to switch gears too soon for you because I love seeing the joy in your eyes as you talk about these pivotal moments in your life, especially looking back on your career. But I wonder if, in the same way that you kind of had these really formative moments full of light and joy, if you and your mom are still in your own Avengers franchise, what would be like the dark night of the soul for you in your career? Was there a moment that was like hands down the worst moment that you ever had, either on the road or in an office building, in a band practice, where you just felt like, you know what, maybe it all ends tomorrow? If the whole thing blows up, and it could, it very, very well might, and maybe should, like, then that just is what it is. Something that you saw no way out of.
Just realized I said that really loud.
Let me get a nice sample.
Eleventy Life is a production of Rock Candy Recordings.